Chief rejects police dog for being old. 2 hours later, he proves he's still a hero. The cold wind swept across the police training grounds as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the asphalt. A lone figure stood tall, his keen eyes scanning the field ahead. This was Shadow, a dog whose name had become synonymous with courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. His sleek black coat bore scars of past battles, each one a silent testament to his years of unwavering service. He had chased down criminals in the dead of night, detected explosives before they could wreak havoc, and even saved lives when all hope seemed lost. Beside him stood Officer Ryan Carter, his longtime handler and closest companion. Their bond wasn't just one of duty. It was something deeper, unbreakable. They had trained together, fought together, and in the most dangerous moments had only each other to rely on. For 8 years, they had been an unstoppable force, a partnership built on trust, instinct, and an unspoken understanding. But tonight felt different. Shadow could sense it. There was an uneasiness in the air, something in Ryan's posture that made him uneasy. His ears perked up as he watched his partner's jaw tighten. Something was wrong. Shadow wasn't just any K-9 officer. He was a legend within the force. His name was whispered with respect, his reputation stretching beyond the walls of the department. New recruits looked up to him, officers trusted him with their lives, and even criminals had come to fear the sight of his piercing amber eyes. In his prime, Shadow had done things no ordinary police dog could. There was the night he single-handedly took down a dangerous fugitive, tracking him through miles of dense forest. The time he found a missing child buried beneath rubble, his paws tirelessly digging even as exhaustion threatened to overcome him. Or the moment he stood in front of a loaded gun to protect Ryan, not flinching, not backing down. Because for Shadow, there was no greater duty than protecting those he loved. But time had a way of creeping in unnoticed. 8 years on the force had taken their toll. His once boundless energy had slowed, and while his mind remained sharp, his body had begun to feel the weight of his years. To Ryan, it didn't matter. Shadow was still the bravest, smartest, most reliable partner he had ever known. But what Ryan believed didn't seem to matter anymore. Not when the newly appointed police chief had different ideas. The fluorescent lights of the police station flickered overhead as Officer Ryan stood at attention in front of Chief Donovan, a man known for his no-nonsense approach and ruthless decisions. His cold gaze moved between Ryan and the black-furred dog sitting loyally at his side. Officer Carter. The chief's voice was sharp, carrying an edge of finality. Shadow has served well, but it's time. He's old. He's slowing down. We need younger, faster K-9s for the force. Ryan's fists clenched at his sides. With all due respect, sir, Shadow is still the best tracker we have. His instincts are sharper than any rookie dog you bring in. The chief barely blinked. Instincts don't outrun bullets, Carter. A younger dog will. Ryan looked down at Shadow, who sat with perfect posture, unaware of the decision being made about his fate. The dog who had risked everything for this department was now being cast aside like an outdated piece of equipment. You're retiring him, effective immediately. The words hit like a sledgehammer. A lump formed in Ryan's throat, but he forced himself to stand firm. At least let me keep him on the force in some capacity. Training, mentorship, he still has value. The chief's expression remained stone cold. We don't have room for sentimentality, officer. He's done. Ryan felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Shadow had given his blood, sweat, and soul to this job, and in return, he was being discarded like he never mattered. Shadow, sensing Ryan's tension, nudged his leg gently, his golden eyes searching his partner's face for answers. But how could Ryan explain to him that the world he had dedicated his life to was turning its back on him? The moment he removed Shadow's police badge from his collar, it felt like he was tearing away a piece of his soul. The badge, the symbol of everything they had worked for, was now just a cold, lifeless piece of metal in his hand. Shadow lowered his ears, his body still, as if he understood what was happening. But there was no protest, no fight, just the silent acceptance of a warrior being forced to step away from battle. As Ryan led him outside one last time, his chest ached with the knowledge that this wasn't just a goodbye to a job. It was a betrayal of loyalty, a cruel dismissal of a hero who still had so much left to give. What neither Ryan nor the chief knew was that Shadow's story wasn't over. And in just 2 hours, the world would see why heroes never retire. The night was eerily silent as Ryan drove down the empty highway, his grip tight around the steering wheel. The rhythmic sound of Shadow's breathing filled the car, a sound that had always brought him comfort. But tonight it felt different, heavy, final. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on Ryan, his tail twitching slightly. He could sense the sadness rolling off his partner, the unspoken grief that neither of them knew how to express. For 8 years, every ride together had meant something. A mission, a call for help, a pursuit of justice. But this ride led to nothing. No badge, no duty, just a silent goodbye. Ryan pulled up outside his home, the engine rumbling softly before he finally turned the key and silenced it. He couldn't move. His hands rested on the wheel, his head bowed as if forcing himself to accept the reality of what was happening. A cold nose nudged his arm. Shadow, always knowing when Ryan was struggling, always pulling him back before he could sink too deep. Ryan forced a small smile and ruffled Shadow's fur. "Come on, buddy. Let's go inside." Shadow wagged his tail slightly, hopping out of the car with his usual discipline. But something was missing. That fire, that purpose, the very thing that had made Shadow who he was. It was like a piece of him had been left back at the station. Inside, Ryan set down Shadow's bowl, filling it with food out of habit. But the old dog simply sat by the door, staring at the police vest hanging by the wall. The same vest he had worn on every mission. The same vest that now meant nothing. Ryan crouched beside him, running a hand through his thick fur. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." Shadow didn't understand words the way humans did, but he understood emotion. And right now, Ryan's voice carried pain, regret, and helplessness. Ryan had fought for him. He had tried. But in the end, the system had decided that Shadow's worth was measured in years, not in heart. Morning came, but it felt different. There was no siren blaring through the radio, no sudden call to action, no urgency in Ryan's movements. Shadow sat by the window, his ears perking up every time a patrol car passed by. He watched them speed down the road, their flashing lights reflecting off the glass. But none of them stopped for him. None of them needed him anymore. He turned his head slightly, his gaze landing on the front door. Every morning for the last 8 years, he had walked through that door wearing his vest, ready to serve, ready to protect, ready to do what he was born to do. But today he was just a dog. Ryan stood in the kitchen, his back turned, pretending not to notice the way Shadow sat there, waiting. But his heart ached at the sight. Shadow didn't know how to live without a purpose. He didn't know how to be anything but a protector. The doorbell rang. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. It was one of the officers from the station, stopping by for something minor. The moment Shadow heard the voice, his tail wagged just slightly, his body tensing as if waiting for the call. "Not this time, buddy," Ryan murmured, stepping between Shadow and the door. Shadow's tail slowed. His ears dropped. And then, for the first time in his life, he turned away from a mission. The door closed, the conversation ended, but the weight of it all lingered. Shadow had been left behind, forgotten, discarded. But the world would soon realize that you can't throw away a hero, because heroes don't wait to be needed. They rise when the world least expects it. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the city skyline. The evening rush was in full swing, with people hurrying home, shops closing, and the air filled with the distant sound of honking cars. It was just another ordinary day. But that illusion of peace was about to be shattered. At the heart of downtown, a high-stakes crisis was unfolding. A situation that would soon prove that true heroes never retire. The First National Bank was one of the most secure financial institutions in the city. With armed guards, surveillance cameras, and reinforced vaults, it was nearly impossible to rob. Until tonight, 3 masked men stormed through the glass doors, their movements calculated and swift. Each one carried an automatic rifle, their voices barking out orders as terrified customers and employees hit the floor. The security guards barely had time to react before they were disarmed and shoved to the side. "Nobody moves. Keep your heads down and you won't get hurt," one of the robbers shouted, his voice filled with a chilling authority. Behind the counter, the bank manager's hands trembled as he fumbled to enter the override codes for the vault. His mind raced, trying to think of a way to stall, but the cold barrel of a gun pressed against his temple made it clear. There was no time for heroics. Outside, the police were already gathering. Squad cars screeched to a halt, forming a blockade along the street. Officers rushed out, drawing their weapons as they took cover behind their vehicles. Among them stood Chief Wallace, the very man who had deemed Shadow too old for service. He assessed the situation grimly, gripping his radio. "We have a hostage situation. Armed suspects inside. No sign of negotiations. We need SWAT on standby." The tension was suffocating. The robbers weren't just here for money. They were prepared to use violence. And inside Ryan's house, just a few blocks away, Shadow's ears perked up. Ryan had been following the news on his phone, his gut tightening as he read the emergency alert about the bank heist. He wasn't on duty anymore, but he knew exactly how these situations played out. Time was running out. Shadow sat by the door, his golden eyes fixed on Ryan, his posture alert. He could feel the shift in the air, the tension radiating from his former partner. And then he heard it. Distant sirens. The unmistakable urgency in the voices of officers outside. Call to action. Something deep inside Shadow awakened. This was his moment. Before Ryan could react, Shadow was already moving. He lunged toward the door, his claws scraping against the wood as he whined urgently. He didn't understand why they were just sitting here. Didn't understand why Ryan wasn't putting on his gear and heading out like he always did. "Shadow, no," Ryan murmured, rubbing his temples. "It's not our job anymore." But Shadow didn't accept that answer. He turned to the police vest hanging by the wall, the same vest that had once been a symbol of duty, of purpose. His teeth gently grasped the fabric, pulling it down before dropping it at Ryan's feet. A silent plea, a reminder, a mission. Ryan stared at the vest, his heart pounding. He could feel the unspoken challenge in Shadow's eyes. "You might have given up on me, but I haven't given up on you." Ryan hesitated. He wasn't a cop in this situation. He wasn't authorized to interfere. But what was he supposed to do? Sit back and watch innocent lives be taken? Shadow made the decision for him. Before Ryan could stop him, the old police dog pushed the door open with his snout and bolted into the night. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. His instincts kicked in, just as they had in every dangerous situation before this. "Damn it, Shadow!" he cursed, grabbing his jacket and running after him. The city had counted Shadow out. They had labeled him as too old, too weak, too slow. But tonight, the city would learn that some heroes never fade. They just wait for their moment to rise again. The situation inside the bank was growing more volatile by the second. The lead robber, a man with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel, paced near the hostages, checking his watch impatiently. The police outside weren't making any moves yet, but he knew their patience wouldn't last. "5 more minutes," he growled at his crew. "Then we grab what we can and get out." Outside, the standoff had reached its peak. Chief Wallace was barking orders. Officers were positioned with their weapons trained on the entrance, and SWAT was moving into position. The tension was suffocating. And in the midst of it all, a shadow slipped through the night. Inside the bank, the robbers had filled their bags with stacks of cash. The hostages huddled together, some silently praying for a miracle, others too terrified to move. Then came the moment they had all been dreading. The lead robber turned to his men. "Time's up. We're moving out hostage insurance." He grabbed a young woman from the group, a bank teller with wide, terrified eyes. She screamed as he yanked her forward, pressing a gun to her side. Outside, Chief Wallace's radio crackled. "They're coming out. They've got a hostage." The officers tensed. The wrong move could mean the difference between life and death. The lead robber stepped toward the doors, pulling the hostage with him. "You try anything, she's dead," he shouted. The SWAT team hesitated. The officers remained frozen, but someone else didn't. A streak of fur shot through the darkness. The criminals didn't see him coming. In the blink of an eye, Shadow launched himself forward, silent, swift, unstoppable. His powerful legs propelled him across the pavement like a missile. The lead robber barely had time to register movement before 90 pounds of trained muscle slammed into him. The force sent him sprawling, his grip on the hostage breaking as he crashed to the ground. The woman scrambled away, sobbing in relief, but Shadow wasn't done. The second robber raised his gun too late. Shadow was on him before he could fire, his powerful jaws locking onto the man's arm. The criminal howled in pain, dropping his weapon as Shadow dragged him to the ground. The third man tried to run, but Shadow was faster. With a precision that came from years of training, he lunged, knocking the last robber off balance. The man crashed to the pavement, his head striking the concrete with a dull thud. The officers snapped out of their shock. "Move in," Chief Wallace bellowed. SWAT stormed forward, officers rushing in from all sides. In mere moments, the criminals were disarmed, cuffed, and subdued. And at the center of it all stood Shadow, his chest heaving, his golden eyes burning with determination. The scene was chaotic. Officers securing the suspects, SWAT sweeping the bank, reporters scrambling for a glimpse of what had just unfolded. But amidst the noise, all eyes kept turning to one figure. The dog who wasn't supposed to be here. Chief Wallace stood frozen, staring at the scene before him. The very dog he had dismissed, the one he claimed was too old to be of any use, had just taken down 3 armed criminals without hesitation. For a moment, silence settled over the scene. Then applause. It started with one officer, then another, until the entire team was cheering. Even the hostages inside the bank, still shaken but alive, watched in awe. Ryan finally caught up, his chest burning from the sprint. His eyes met Shadow's, and he felt an overwhelming wave of pride. Kneeling down, he ruffled Shadow's fur, his voice thick with emotion. "You never gave up, did you, buddy?" Shadow let out a low, satisfied huff, his tail wagging just slightly. Chief Wallace cleared his throat, stepping forward. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes now, something like respect. "I was wrong," he admitted, nodding at Shadow. "He's still got it." Ryan smirked, patting Shadow's side. "He never lost it." The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Tonight, the city wouldn't remember Shadow as just an old dog pushed into retirement. Tonight, they would remember him as the hero he had always been. The night air was filled with murmurs and whispers, the weight of what had just happened sinking into everyone present. Officers exchanged looks of disbelief, and reporters scrambled to capture the story of the forgotten police dog who had just saved the city. Shadow, still standing tall despite his exhaustion, watched everything with calm, unwavering eyes. His job wasn't about recognition, it had never been. But tonight, something had changed. Chief Wallace stood frozen, his normally sharp demeanor replaced with something unreadable. He had made the decision to retire Shadow, believing him to be too old, too slow, too much of a liability. And yet, in the most crucial moment, it wasn't the young recruits or the latest tactical technology that had saved the day. It was Shadow, the same dog he had rejected. For the first time in his long career, Wallace felt something rare: regret. He took a slow step forward, watching as Ryan knelt beside Shadow, gently running a hand through his fur. "You knew," Wallace finally said, his voice quieter than usual. Ryan looked up, meeting his gaze. "I never doubted him," he replied. "Not for a second." Wallace exhaled, looking around at his officers, the media, the rescued hostages. All of them had just witnessed something remarkable. Shadow hadn't just proven himself. He had reminded them all what true bravery looked like. Then, in a moment no one expected, Chief Wallace lowered himself onto one knee. He met Shadow's tired but still alert eyes. The same dog who had served under him for years, who had put his life on the line more times than he could count. "I was wrong about you, boy," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "And I owe you an apology." Shadow simply stared at him, his tail giving a slow, understanding wag. He wasn't the kind to hold grudges. He had never needed words. His actions had always spoken louder. The following day, the story had already spread like wildfire. "The retired dog turned hero" was the headline on every major news outlet. The precinct was packed with officers, reporters, and even city officials who had come to witness something extraordinary. Ryan stood proudly next to Shadow, who had been freshly groomed, his badge gleaming around his neck one more time. Chief Wallace took the stage, clearing his throat before addressing the crowd. "Last night, an old friend reminded us all of something important," he began. "That true heroes don't retire. True heroes never stop protecting those they love." He turned toward Shadow, his expression softer than anyone had ever seen. "For years, this dog has given everything to this department, to this city. And when we turned our backs on him, he still came running when we needed him the most." The audience listened in silence, some officers even wiping their eyes. "That's why today, I'm making something right." Wallace reached into his pocket and pulled out something small but significant. A polished, golden medal. "Shadow, for your years of dedicated service and for saving lives when it mattered most, the department awards you the Medal of Honor." A wave of applause erupted as Wallace leaned down, fastening the medal to Shadow's collar. The old dog, never one for fanfare, simply stood there, strong, proud, and unshaken. Ryan knelt beside him, rubbing his ears. "Told you you'd always be a hero," he murmured. Shadow huffed softly, then did something that sent the entire room into laughter and tears. He lifted his paw and placed it on Wallace's hand. A gesture of acceptance. A moment of redemption. And just like that, the dog they had cast aside became a legend. The sun dipped below the horizon as Officer Ryan walked beside his old partner, the city streets now echoing with admiration for the dog who refused to be forgotten. People recognized Shadow wherever he went. Civilians stopping to pet him, officers nodding in quiet respect, and even children running up to thank him. But for Shadow, none of it mattered. He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it because it was his duty. Days passed, but the impact of Shadow's actions remained. The police station had framed his Medal of Honor, and his name was spoken with awe and gratitude. Chief Wallace made an official statement, announcing a new policy to honor aging police dogs rather than discard them. Never again would a loyal K-9 be tossed aside simply for growing old. Shadow had changed everything. But despite the recognition, Shadow never asked for anything in return. All he ever wanted was to be by Ryan's side, to protect, to serve, to be the guardian he was meant to be. Ryan, knowing his partner was getting older, made a decision of his own. One evening, as Shadow lay on the precinct steps, watching the officers come and go, Ryan knelt beside him. "You've done enough, buddy," he whispered. "It's time to come home." The next day, Shadow officially retired, not as a forgotten dog, but as a legend. Ryan adopted him permanently, giving him a home where he could finally rest. No longer a tool for law enforcement, no longer a dismissed old soul, but a cherished family member. Yet, even in retirement, Shadow never stopped being a protector. Whenever Ryan left for duty, Shadow would wait by the door, his ears perked, his eyes sharp. Because no matter how much time passed, a hero never truly stops being a hero. Shadow's story became more than just one incredible night. It became a lesson, a reminder of loyalty, bravery, and the undeniable worth of those we too often overlook. Too many times, we cast aside those who've given us everything, be it people, animals, or even memories. But true loyalty never fades. True courage never weakens. And true heroes never stop being heroes, no matter their age. As Ryan sat on his porch one evening, watching Shadow rest beside him, he smiled. "They said you were too old to make a difference," he murmured. Shadow cracked open one eye, his tail thumping softly against the wooden floor. Ryan chuckled. Guess you proved them all wrong. And with that, Shadow closed his eyes, knowing that his legacy would never be forgotten. Shadow's story is a powerful reminder that age does not define worth, and true heroes never stop being heroes. His loyalty, courage, and unwavering dedication prove that sometimes, those we underestimate have the most to give. What do you think about Shadow's incredible journey? Do you believe older service animals deserve more respect and care? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories about the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Let's spread the message that loyalty and bravery should never be forgotten.